Well, hey there, sweet peas. Welcome back to Friendless. I'm your host, James Avramenko, back once again with a brand new episode with very special returning guest, actor, producer, wrestling aficionado, the one and only Rod Peter Jr. Rod and I discuss the anti-heroes of John Carpenter movies, how to put on a Fringe play in your 30s, how to build a community with only a single mushroom for company, and so much more. Rod is an absolute joy, and you're going to love this episode, so lean back, get comfy, set your volume at a reasonable level, and enjoy my interview with Rod Peter Jr. here on Friendless. So, Rod Peter Jr., you are returning once more to the show, and I cannot be more pleased to have you. I have so many disparate... Well, I have so many, different direction questions for you, and I don't really know where to start. But I think for listeners who either haven't listened to your other episode or just aren't familiar with who you are, I've been starting recent interviews with a very blunt question of who the hell are you?
That's a deep question. That's a deep question. Or it's not. I guess it depends on how deep of a human being you are, right?
What's the impulse?
What's the some people are like, well, I'm a cashier. Oh, that's how you identify in the world, just a cashier. That's great. The douchey answer is I'm an actor, which it kills my soul. Yeah. I hate
my spine. Every vertebrae just fused together,
Yeah. I think I don't like it because if you're not already famous, you have to explain why you're an actor. No one goes like, hey, who are you? And they're like, George Clooney. What do you do? Well, I'm an actor. Oh, so how's that work for you, George Clooney? They know right away. But if you're like, oh, I'm an actor, and they're like, as a hobby, is there anything I've seen you in? What TV show? And you're like, oh, just like theater. Like, oh, like with a band? Like, nope, that's not the same thing. But thanks for, okay. But who am I? That's a question I ask every day to myself. Who am I? Yeah, funny thing. I ask myself almost a version of that question in a weird way when I'm about to walk on stage for a show now. And I have this I have no jitters anymore with theater. And I don't have that the butterflies or will this work or will this not work? I get it all pre-done and then I write my thing and then I just go out there and I go, nope, you either like it or you don't, and I don't give a shit anymore. But I have this weird thing now where I can feel the seconds, the seconds before you have to walk on stage. And I always just think to myself, what if I didn't?
Yeah.
What if I just walked away?
Yeah.
What would happen? And I just go, what life could I live if I just right now walked away and just did something else with my life? And it's just this weird, and I go, nope, don't have time to think about it. And then I just go right on stage. Because I asked that question, I'm like, what if everything was falling apart? And who am I? What is this? All these, and it's like, no, you don't have time to think. You got to say lines. All right, great.
Yeah.
It's a weird, stupid thing I do.
I haven't been on stage in a long time, but the last couple shows that I was doing, I remember I wouldn't be nervous all day. Nothing would, I had a bit of a pre-show ritual, and I would always do the same thing. And I was playing music in the last show I was in, and so I'd practice a song. And I had a similar experience to what you were talking about it would only be the 5 seconds before, because the show would start with me on stage. So it'd be the house lights would go down, and then suddenly my heart would just go, But then it's, too late. Go do your job now, and it almost I don't know if it's I don't think it was this intense, but it's I almost think of it as a little bit of an ego death moment, and it's your body panicking because you're releasing the James identity, and you're about to inhabit the next character for a bit, so it's almost like a little death, and your body goes uh-oh, I'm giving up this, this ego and stuff, right? And I'm not sure if that's safe or not.
Yeah, I don't like. I have no idea if it's a healthy thing or an unhealthy
Mm.
thing or what it even means. But and
Do you
I
know
was
any
saying it.
healthy actors?
Healthy actors, like mentally healthy.
Yeah, because I don't know if I've
Oh,
met like a healthy actor, and I don't
yeah,
say this accusatory or to anything,
yeah,
but like,
yeah,
but of all the arts, I sometimes feel like it's the least cathartic. You know?
yeah. It's the you're kind of damned if you do, damned if like. There's two categories. You're so self confident that you're a prick, and no one likes you, right? The person's like, I'm perfect, and
Yeah,
I'm so confident on stage or like in front of the
darling.
camera, right? And
Yeah.
you're like, oh, I hate that person. Or that person is so self-deprecating. And it's like,
Yes.
I'm a fraud. I'm a fraud. Everybody hates me. I'm a fraud.
Yeah.
I'm a fraud. Yeah. And then that person's also a little annoying because you talk to that
Listen,
person and they're like, no, no, I'm a fraud. I'm a fraud. I'm a fraud. And you're like, just take the fucking compliment.
it's just a black
Um,
hole, right? Nobody,
yeah.
I was recently told, and this one has really stuck with me. Nobody wants to fuck the little guy. You gotta stop playing the victim. You gotta stop playing the
Yeah.
like the
Yeah.
low status. Like nobody wants to fuck
Yeah.
the little guy. Like be the big guy, like
Yeah.
you want to get laid, be the big guy, right?
Yeah. No, it's true. Yeah. Yeah, it's hard. It's also hard to take compliments, and because if you're
Mm.
so self-deprecating and you're, like when you go like, "Oh, if I'm the harshest critic in the room, no one can hurt me.
Yes.
No critic can say anything harmful that's already thought in
Mhm.
my brain.
Mhm.
They could boo me, and I'd be like, whatever. So when you go in just being really hard on yourself, it's like you feel like you're putting up a thing of armor, but then
Mhm.
the fallback of that is when people are trying to actually be genuinely nice to you and genuinely caring. You're
Yep.
like, no, I don't know, it could be better, and you're like, just come on, man, we're just trying to be nice to you.
As you've got that like
And I suffer from that, like I
thick
totally
armor
do,
on.
like,
Yeah. Oh,
yeah,
of course.
like my thing now is just to go like, oh, thank you, I appreciate it, thank you,
Mhm.
like it was really nice. And because I'm always like, the moment the thing's done, I'm like, how can I make this better? How can I make this better? How can I make
Mm.
this better? What went wrong? How can you fix this? What joke can we, change? And all the little things. It's
Mm.
all work and work and work and work and work. But then also
That
like,
sounds exhausting.
yeah.
That sounds like no fun.
Oh
Like, and
yeah, it
I don't
is.
mean to. I
Yeah.
don't mean to say. And I say this with no judgment. I say this
Yeah.
with like a deep empathy of like. But you're making a play. Like, where's the fun in it? You
Hmm.
know?
Well, and that's the thing is like right now I'm in Edmonton doing Edmonton Fringe,
Hmm.
and just finished Winnipeg, had a week and a half off, go to Edmonton, and I was doing a solo show in Winnipeg and then a two-person show in Edmonton. And the two-person show debuted. Like we'd never done it before. The other
Hmm.
actor is from Toronto, so like we barely got to rehearse. We never worked together before, so it was just like, all right, we're diving in. Like we're doing this um, on the deep end. And so, you know, when you think of fringes and how hard you have to work and how much you're the producer, you're the writer, you're the
Hmm.
costume designer, you're the lighting designer, you got to, if you don't do your work, you don't succeed with these type
Yeah.
of shows, because there's no crew, right? There's nobody who fixes the script for you. So you're like, okay, I got to make a script that's works for tech. I have to do a tech script. I have to do a
Mm.
lighting design. I have to do a sound design. I have to not just do the sound design. I have to all put that in a Q lab, and then I got to send Q lab to the technician.
Yeah.
And you have to do all your promo work. You have to make your own poster. You have to, do all your publicity. And then every day you're hitting the street and you're walking around town. And you're trying to tell people about your show and walking up to strangers and saying, "Hi, you want to see another show?" And you know, uh, and there's a level of it that's just absolutely draining and soul crushing, but then there's another level of it that um, once you do it, you're like, oh, I could do anything.
Yeah.
I could do anything in the world now. Like
Yeah.
somebody's like, oh, I can't do this one job. I'm like, that's nothing. I do like 10 jobs. to
Yeah.
do something that may not make me money. And that's the craziest part, is that Fringe, there's no guarantee, right? Like,
Mhm.
you spend like $5,000 investing in yourself and you go, well, I hope I make this back, right? Like,
Well, and because it's
and you
like
never know.
you're
You never
well,
know.
that's just it, and you're booking so far in advance, right? Because you
Yeah.
book all the
Yeah.
festivals like sometimes a
Yeah.
year ahead, and it costs a lot of money just to apply, like let
Oh,
alone
yeah.
actually then get in,
Yeah. Yeah.
and all that's prepaid when you show up. So, like you say, it's like the Fringe doesn't give a shit. They've already got your money.
Oh,
Like
yeah. They've got
right.
your money. They get it. And um, you almost miss that sort of naive 20-year-old, 18-year-old,
Hmm.
when you're fresh out of high school or university or whatever, and you're just like, I can do this and it doesn't matter. And you just got like, all the charisma in the world, and the older you get, you're just like, oh man, if this tanks, I'm ruined. Like I'm constantly like every
Yep.
5 minutes looking at my print sheet of the sales and going, okay, that's one more ticket. Okay,
Yep.
today I have to sell 26 tickets to break even, and I just go,
Yeah.
tomorrow it's 22 tickets. Or, you just like, you do the math. And I remember being 20 and going, this is just fun,
Yeah.
and
Let's go spend our
I'm a
we got a
star,
yeah, right?
yeah,
We got an
and
honorarium,
yeah, you're like, woo, and you're like, yeah, I got a decent 3-star review. Like, that's a win for me. And you're just like, now I'm going to go drinking every day. And you're just like,
Yep.
waste all your money on booze, socializing.
Yep.
And
Yep.
now I'm like, you know, well, I don't drink anymore, but the whole thing of like, nah, I'm good, and just,
Yep.
I'll be back at my billets in a bath, just
Yeah. Yeah. So tell me about
relaxing. And
this,
yeah.
so tell me about these shows, because I've been seeing you posting about the Edmonton one, and it looks
Hmm.
like kind of a send up of Escape from New York.
Yeah. It
And
totally
what
is.
so tell me about the kind of like the genesis of it, what it is, and how is it being received? How is it going?
Uh, so far, really good. Uh, we just got a really great glowing review in the Edmonton Journal.
Fuck yeah.
Um, my favorite is that it says it's 4.5 out of 5 stars, and the best pull quote is at the very end. It says something along the lines of like, "This is like a really great show." Blah 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 blah. If you don't mind hearing the word "pussy" a dozen times, and I was like, "Oh, okay, you're just gonna say it and not censor it in a newspaper." And I just like the idea of just saying Edmonton Journal pussy 4.5 out of 5 stars. uh, that's the only pull quote I use on my poster now. Pussy. Because yeah, our show is very vulgar and it's not for kids. And yet, the best part is that Tamlin, who plays Snake Plissken, or plays Kurt Russell as Snake Plissken,
Mhm.
um, kids see Tamlin on the street in this costume and just want to see the show. And they're like, "Oh, we
Totally.
got to come," and we're like it's adult themes, adult
I
themes.
mean, that's
Um,
that's like that's the case for the original Escape from New York. I remember
well,
seeing
exactly,
like
yeah,
photos of him as a kid and being like, "That's the coolest man I've ever seen on earth.
yeah,
I must watch this movie." And I
yeah.
remember seeing it and being like, "Oh, I should not have watched this." Like
Well,
being
yeah,
8 years old,
it's an
being like,
R-rated
"I
John
shouldn't be doing
Carpenter,
this." Yeah, right.
right? And I think that was that's the kind of idea behind it. Um, the whole sort of genesis was I last year after Edmonton Fringe, uh, I was hanging out with Tamlin Bryson, who's a very very talented actor, and she's been doing Fringes for a little while, um, and she was just telling these like really crass stories around the beer tent, and they were just really funny. They were very very crass, and her shows are very um, not crass. Like they
Mm,
straddle the line a little bit, but they're more like parental guidance and very there's adult subject, but it's not like dirty humor. Like it's not
mhm.
like R-rated kind of comedy. But she was just telling these like really raunchy stories, and they were incredibly funny, and we are just laughing to the point like people like crying, going like, "Oh, this is so funny." And I was sitting in the airport in Vancouver on the way back from Edmonton with my best friend, who was my stage manager, and we're having breakfast in the airport, and I just said, "Hey, man, I have an idea. What if Tamlin played Kurt Russell as Snake Plissken and fucks a puppet on stage?" And he was like, "Yeah." I was like, "That's my idea. That's it." I was like, "I just want to create
The
a
whole show.
show." based off of this dumb idea where like there's a female puppet and Tamlin, this femme presenting like a female, um, playing a male, and does something super toxic, like all about toxic masculinity and what that
Yeah.
is, and fucks a puppet on stage. Just
Love it.
like does a sex scene. And I was like, I just think that'd be the funniest thing on the planet. And he was like, you should tell Tamlin. And then I kind of like wrote a little bit of a plot synopsis in a couple of weeks. And then I sent a message to Tamlin. I was like, hey, I have an idea. And she went, I'll do it. I went, great. And then I thought of it as a solo show, just to write for her. And then she said, would you do it with me? And I said, well, I'll think about it. And then agreed. And then we started writing it. We took a year to write this whole thing. And we spent like 4 months just going like, watch everything, like watch every 70s, 80s action movie. I just watched like I watched everything, but I think 3 Kurt Russell movies, like his entire filmography.
Damn.
Just to take in all the references and like what you can get. I mean, most of it's John Carpenter stuff in the show, but yeah, it's just this kind of it feels almost like it's going to be a love letter to John Carpenter, but it's more of this like, hey, we really know what we're doing here, which is holding a mirror up to those type of characters and those type of films and showing you how crazy it was and saying like, hey, you actually thought this was a hero, but this guy's a prick and he's a misogynistic jerk, and he takes advantage of women and is racist and not okay, and yet is like, I'm the hero. And so we didn't hold back. Like we just like wrote these jokes within this whole thing where this person's just like, like, let me guess, this guy's name is Pablo and he's got a bomb strapped to it. And you're like, no. Just, you can't say those things. It's like, well, I don't know. I'm pretty sure men are allowed, and just really creating a character that just goes like, yeah, I have no censor to myself.
Yeah.
But then putting it in a situation where it's a femme presenting person playing a masculine person. And what does that look like? Like almost clown-esque. And then myself playing all the like side characters. Like I play Steve Buscemi guy, like the sidekick. And then we have a puppet that's all the female characters because we were like, well, I was like, it just feels weird for me to be like, yeah, like I'm a guy and then play it Faye, or like put like a female voice to it that's stereotypical, like I'm a lady, like that kind of garbage.
Sure.
So just like removing that and just going, oh, it's just my voice, but a female puppet, and yeah, and then just like putting all the weird shit in there.
Female characters are just like your deep regular voice kind of thing.
Yeah. Like I don't even try. Like I'm not like, oh, I'm not. The main villain is called Karen Jane Roding, which is a cis white straight woman, and Snake is like, well, I don't know. White people aren't known for doing bad things. Like, but if it was to start some way, it'd be a chick. Am I right? And tries to like high five, and and I'm always like, no, you can't say that. But Tamlin is so invested in the character of playing Kurt Russell as Snake, and just is like, no, like chicks, yeah, like it's so cool. And it's just bonkers. Like we use shadow puppetry, and there's like, we do a fake mime motorcycle chase scene, and we do a full 5-minute fight, which we completely do shot for shot, aside from one backdrop and a weapon that's used from They Live. So the big famous fight where the two of them fight, where he's like, hey, put on these glasses, like don't touch me. We watch that and do it beat by beat for like the exact same thing. And then we do that, but then we also then play a commentary track of ourselves talking about how we watched the movies and how we choreographed it beat by beat. And so it's like this weird meta, bizarre show.
Did you have you this is just, I literally just finished reading this book the other day. It was just called Predator, a memoir, an obsession, or something like that, by this guy Anders something. And he talks about like he's watched, like he's like in his like late 40s, early 50s, and he's watched Predator like 150 times, like just for the book kind of thing. And he like deconstructs it like almost frame by frame to the point of just like obsession. And he unpacks all the like like the novelization was written by this like famous gay poet who at the exact same time he was
Crazy.
writing, like there's just so many like side stories at the same time that this poet, his name was Manet or Monet, Manet, I think. At the same time he was writing the novelization, his partner was dying of AIDS, and he actually ended up writing a memoir of that time where he's talking about like watching his love like die from this, this virus, and he was like working on the Predator novelization, and then like there's all this other stuff. Obviously there's like deep homoeroticism involved, and
Yeah.
there's like, and there's all the, but then the other thing that you're talking about that is so like explored in this is this like watching someone watching something watch something, and like the removal
Uh-huh.
of like, you're watching the Predator watch Arnold, but you're also watching yourself having watched it, and then you're watching yourself watching it, and it's just like it becomes
Mhm.
this like really deep
Mhm.
layered deconstruction, and it's fucking fascinating. But and it's actually sent me on a bit of a black hole recently of rewatching all these old 80s 90s action movies, Terminator, RoboCop, Predator, and all
Mhm.
these,
Oh,
and
I love RoboCop.
it's fucking
Love
unbelievable.
RoboCop.
It's
Yeah, I have that
fucking
on 4K and it is
unbelievable.
amazing. Like the Arrow 4K of RoboCop with all the special features. Oh my god, it is amazing.
It's
Have
it
you
it
have you
that's
seen the
one that
video,
holds
the
up.
YouTube video of like the guys that make fun of that the groin shot? Have you
No.
seen that video? Yeah. It's very R
Okay,
rated.
I'll have to look
But
it up.
like in the movie where he's like,
Oh, I
drop your
know the shot
weapons,
where he
drop it.
shoots him in the dick.
They're gonna
Yep.
like, and then he shoots the guy in the groin. There's a YouTube out there where he shoots it and it just gets more graphic. And he basically groin shots like 100 men. And they just like these guys made this, and it's an amazing video. Like they somehow work themselves into the shot and it just gets
Yeah.
graphic. Like there's a non-graphic version, and then there's one where you're like you see all the genitals and all the exploding, and you just see like man after man after man after man be like, let's get this lady, and they just like one after another just their balls
Just take
exploding.
shots.
And it's so funny.
Oh, I
Like you just
love it.
don't see it coming, and it's just oh my god. Yeah,
That's so
because
good.
it is a perfect idea, because when you see that scene you're like, oh, that'd be funny, and then someone did it, and yeah. But RoboCop on its own, like
Yeah.
it's also like it's another level good because it actually understands the genre,
Yes.
right? And so I think some people kind of like Showgirls and was it Starship Troopers or Recall, like
Mhm.
all of that filmography from the director is like
Yeah,
it's
Verhoeven, yeah.
all what he does is so well is he holds up a mirror to like American society and goes like, this is how fucked up I view the like what I'm viewing
Yeah.
from you. This is what I'm seeing. And then people every single time at the time are like, what a weird film that I don't understand.
Yeah.
He's just weird.
It
And
must
you're like,
suck. Yeah.
you don't get it. Like he's holding up a
Yeah.
mirror to society here. And that's what like RoboCop is fascinating. It's like fascinating
Mhm.
about like people's uh fascination of like police culture and
Mhm.
like the violence and like
Mhm.
reality police TV, and
Mhm.
just like all of that like
Yeah.
interesting, weird. And then like there's a I think there's a subplot within RoboCop that's about like global warming, like
That's
in
in
the
later
news,
ones. Yeah, the
right?
way it's
Like
kind of it's
I think it's
sort
like
of,
in the background in the news, right? Like
yeah, it
when he
gets
does in the
talked about a little
news.
bit, but it's like that's the well, like yes and no. If I remember, I only watched the first one recently, but I remember
Yeah,
it being more in the second one. But
right.
I know the second one isn't very good. So I just know in the background of the first one, it's there's just these funny little news bulletins of just like
Yeah, yeah,
how awful everything, and it's just
yeah,
progressively gets worse and worse and worse, and
yeah,
but it's the same like happy go lucky, I'd
yeah.
buy that for $1.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. And that's the thing is like the commentary of like reality TV and just
Mhm.
yeah, like yeah, his like weird under the current B plots. Like you just go, God, he's so
Yeah.
good, dude. Yeah,
um but it's so fascinating watching them too, because it's like they, like you talked about Snake Plissken, is that it's like these characters were like the idolized men for
mm-hmm,
generations, and it
mm-hmm,
was like the tough, no nonsense, punch your problems away and get the girl
yeah,
anyway, and no matter what you do, she's gonna love you, and and like
yeah,
and like just like the casual homophobia, you know,
Oh
and
yeah, yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
you
And
know,
it's like
and
you
it just
can't.
and it was romanticized, right? It was glorified,
Yeah,
you know, and
yeah.
but
And that's always my question with like John Carpenter films is I'm never quite sure if he has his finger on the pulse and is making the commentary. Like, cause like he almost like there's such a like there's such a fine line with his stuff where you're like,
mm,
huh, like you know, like you're like, I don't know. Like there's
yeah,
times where I'm like, are you making the commentary on these type of films, or are you
I
not
don't think
making the
so.
commentary?
I think
Right?
he's too from what I know about him, and like this is me
Because
just
I don't know
like
anything about
obviously,
him, right? Like I
yeah,
didn't, I never was like, let me deep dive on the director. I was like, oh, I'm gonna watch his films and we're gonna make fun of the films.
yeah,
But I
I
was like, I
got
don't need to know
into
the guy.
yeah, I got into a few because I got really into Halloween for a bit, and so I started
Mm-hmm.
learning a little bit about him through that. And like the first Halloween was like an impulse, right? Like he wrote it in a weekend, and
Right.
that's why
Yeah, yeah,
it's like very if you actually unpack it, it's like actually a piece of shit, but I love it. So, you know,
yeah.
but
Mm-hmm.
it makes no sense whatsoever when you actually start pulling at the threads. But
Yeah, suddenly on
um
Halloween, no one's home, right?
yeah, well, it's
The
like
whole
the
block's
whole what's his
empty.
name?
Hello.
Oh fuck, what is his name? The psychiatrist,
Oh yeah,
Loomis.
I know
Like
you're talking.
Loomis
Yeah.
serves no purpose anyway.
No.
But it's
Yeah.
like he he's a very impulsive writer. He's also more of a composer than he is a director. Like he writes
Yeah.
more for his music, and I don't know. I get the sense that uh he writes on impulse, and then he lets other people say what they think it is, and then
Right.
he goes, yeah, yeah, that's what I meant, you know. And I don't know, I get the impression he's a much bigger misogynist than I think is
Yeah.
normally ascribed to him, you know. But
Well,
it's
like
why his
no
best movie is
female
The
in his.
Thing, where there's no women in it,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. You're like, oh, like, yeah, you don't. Yeah, it's funny because like I really enjoy Christine, but it's like a Stephen King book,
Hmm.
and so like he can't really put it like because he didn't write it, he didn't put in like his
Hmm.
own. So like it's a pretty interesting story, Christine.
Hmm.
And again, like the thing is just all it's the whole male. Um, but like there's things like They Live, which like I love They Live,
Sure.
but then there's a side of it you go, I don't know what you were trying to say here because like
That's just
we
it.
now live in a world where you're like, okay, obey, but obey what? Like what is he
Mhm.
anti? Like is he
Well,
anti-government? Is he anti?
honestly,
And what does that mean,
yes.
right? What is that? And now you're like, is he like? Because now you go, all right. No, I know some weird like Trump supporters going to also be like, that means this. And you go, no, 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 it
Exactly.
actually is the opposite of that. But because he's
Exactly.
never really come out and just been like, this is what it's about,
Yeah.
it's almost like anybody can identify with it.
Yeah.
And thus the film almost becomes problematic. You're just
Yeah.
like,
Well,
oh
it
man,
becomes
this
generic, you
like,
know.
yeah. And the film
That
itself is
that's
like just messed up and like
yes.
entertaining just for the Roddy Piper stuff. Like,
Yeah.
you know, like
Who
hell comes
himself was a
or
total
hell
piece of
comes.
shit.
Oh yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
know?
But I mean like, or like hell comes to Frogtown. Like that's a movie, right?
Mm.
Just if you ever want to see like the greatest Roddy Piper movie of all time where he's the last man, the last was it fertile man on the planet, and so all the women are
Jesus.
like, we have to have sex with Roddy Piper, right? And then there's
Saskatoon's
frog
own.
mutants, and yeah, it's insane, but it's great.
Um, yeah, yeah. I don't know. I, I guess I don't. I haven't spent since like you know since my like deep dive on those initial movies.
Mm-hmm.
The more I think about it, the more I realize I haven't put a lot of thought into John Carpenter. But like I oh shit, I had a thought about what you were saying about the but like They Live is that it's like those are the kinds of movies where it feels like like the modern equivalent is like it's Joe Roganitis of like
Yeah,
just
yeah,
being oppositional but
yeah.
actually like not actually standing for anything with any genuine substance. It's like
Mm-hmm.
you just are oppositional because it challenges your status quo of like you're normal and you're the best. And so
Yeah,
you know, but then as soon as you start unpacking those, you realize that they stand for nothing, and they're just actually just like vapid conservatives again, you know,
yeah,
like it's just the same horseshit repackaged, you know. And I'm just really tired of like, yeah, but it's like oh, but it's cool, man, because like he puts on these sunglasses and then he like sees the real world, man. And it's like, no,
Yeah.
there you see the real world. Like there's no fucking
Yeah. Yeah.
conspiracy. There's
Yeah.
no lizard people. Like the fucking people who are laughing at you right now, you can see them
Yeah.
right now. You know, like
Yeah.
it's infuriating.
No, yeah, I totally agree. It's interesting you say the Joe Rogan thing because in the show, the whole why Snake has to go to, because it's called like Escape from Edmonton, and then in every
Mhm.
city we change the name of what the title is to, like Escape from
Yep.
Saskatoon or Escape from Minnesota, wherever you want to go.
Yep.
But in this case, what doesn't change is why Snake has to go. So there's a black box with a very important item inside of it, and he has to retrieve it because it's been lost within the prison. But what you find out is that what's inside the black box is a cassette tape. And that cassette tape can, when played, can brainwash anyone who listens to it. And so the main villain wants the cassette tape to play it and then to be able to brainwash everyone in Canada and then use key words with their voice. Right. And the joke is like, and I'll say things like sheeple, woke, and Second Amendment, and then I'll be the new leader of Canada. But then it's like, well, what is actually played on that cassette tape? Like, what is the actual thing that is audio? And it's like, oh, well, it's just a simple guy named Joe who smokes pot and talks to an array of guests, And then over time, without you even knowing, just over time, very slowly, he starts talking to conspiracy nuts, and then without you even picking up on it, bammo, they start telling you to do stupid shit like shoving a horse pill up your butthole, and then it just delves into this thing where it's like, but once you're hooked, and you'll believe anything this moron tells you, right? It's like, and that's why we want this, because it's like the most palpable sort of garbage thing that people go, oh, okay. And then they're like, and then if you just slip in right after that and go, also this, they're like, did you hear? Like cows now, shoot
Better take,
lasers
like,
from their
creatine.
eyeballs. Yeah. And you're like, no, what are you talking about? Like, and just, it's a thing in the show where nobody really laughs at that joke. Is they're like, oh, okay. But we're like, no, we're not changing that because that's like a very true thing, right? It's like right now there's a lot of this garbage of like, well, I listened to this and yeah, cool. And you're like,
And I trust him, so I don't have to do my research because he's trustworthy.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's kind of like also a big part of the show is like this idea of like, just this like it's just white male being like, well, I think, and so therefore it is. And anyway, moving on, not going to question, not going to even research, and just not going to do any work. And you're like, what is happening here? And then the audience sees that. And that we are like, but that's the protagonist. And we just openly show that the protagonist is constantly doing this, but nothing ever goes wrong for the protagonist, right? Like nothing bad ever happens in our show to Snake. Snake lives, Snake wins, Snake gets the girl. Like in the end, wins everything. And it's still like, and I didn't learn any lesson. Yes, right? And then everyone's like, what the hell did I just watch? And you're like, yeah, exactly. Think about
You
that.
just watch every story you've ever been told. Yeah. I want to loop back to so one of the like relating to sort of the experience of like continuing to work within theater and the process of Fringe, and I think that this really plays into one of the core questions that I've introduced to this new kind of batch of interviews has been this question of community, right? It's a term I've been hearing batted around a lot. There's I for any number of different communities, right? And the evocation that word presents, and as I start to define it for myself, I realize that it's so nebulous that it's almost undefinable in a lot of ways. And so I guess I'm really curious, like, what does it mean to you to have a community, and what does it mean to sort of show up within a community?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because, like, I know you had sent before the podcast to be like, "Hey, here's that sort of question," and I agree with you. Like everything you just said, like those were the thoughts I had. Right? Like just like, oh, it's such a big thing. What does it really mean? Yeah, it's a really it's tough, right? Because I think a lot of people put stock into community. And I think that like, the obvious answer is like that it's important, that it's needed. Um, you know, without community, you're nothing. you're not like the idea of like you're not alone,
Mm.
right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it suddenly kind of like I was thinking about it and I was like, oh, like thinking about being sober now, and like that idea of when people were like, oh, if you're, or like depression, and like
Mm-hmm.
being someone who's like, oh yeah, like I now know that that's what I've been diagnosed with for like years and years and years, and I can talk about this. But then thinking about how when you're struggling and you don't have the words to communicate what is presented to you, is be like, well, reach out to the community. The community is there. Find the community. Find the community.
Mm-hmm.
And it made me really think about um, how like we teach people to like find community
Mm.
and find that support, but we don't really teach uh, community to like to embrace, right? Like I think
Mm.
that there's an interesting thing about how we're always like, you do the work as the individual, not the group help the individual, right?
Sure.
Like it's almost like it should be all for one, not
Mm.
one for all in that sort of
Sure.
situation when it comes to community. Because if you have a community and then you have a single, like somebody who's singular who doesn't feel like they're in the community, it really shouldn't be their job to be like, how do I fit into a community? Where is my
Sure.
community? Like, it
Yep.
should be community that just embraces. So if somebody walks into a room and is like, hey, I think I identify within this community, they go, great, come on in, not like,
Yes. Yeah.
well, do you, let's get out our
It's
checklist and like, do
parameters.
you check
Yeah.
that, and it's like, wait a second. Um, yeah. So,
And
it's
that's
yeah, and it
interesting.
is.
Like,
It's tough, right? And
yeah.
the other thing I was thinking about, and I know this is like there's a little bit of an offshoot, but it's
No.
I read this book recently. I'll double check. I don't want to get the title like the full on title wrong. But it was called uh, "The Stranger in the Woods: The Extraordinary Story of the Last True Hermit."
Mm.
And it's a true story. I think you would actually like love this book. Get it. Um, it's about this like true story in the 2000s. They found this guy. He was arrested for being a hermit in the woods of Maine, and he had basically been a hermit for like 30 years, like over 30 years. And the whole thing is that like at one point when he was like out of high school, he just went, "I don't want to do this anymore." Got in his car and drove into the woods. Didn't tell his family and just disappeared.
Wow.
And he just lived outside. He didn't have a tent, nothing, and the way he survived was just like stealing from the cabins like around this lake like
Yeah.
in front of this forest. And finally he gets arrested because of technology, right? Like because eventually they're like, hey, we have better security systems and all this stuff. Like it's in the 2000s by the time he gets arrested.
Mhm.
And so this person hears the story and goes and meets him and writes a book through their interviews. And it's really really bizarre, and at first you're like, oh, that's crazy, and it delves into like like 9 out of 10 people can't even go 4 hours without having human contact, right? And
Mm.
all these like stories about monks and people in caves, and but this person just for like 30, like over 30 years was like, I don't even have to speak to a human being and I'm
Yeah.
happy, you know
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
like the most fascinating part is that like the closest thing that he had to like a pet or someone to talk to was a mushroom that just slowly grew over those years, right?
Wow.
And this guy never talked to people, was like, no, I never talked out loud. I never talked to myself. I was just happy. And he wasn't vengeful. He
Hmm.
wasn't angry. He wasn't like, oh, I have to, like, he just was like, no, this is just what I want. And I don't want to
Mhm.
be a part of this.
Mm.
And by the end of the book, there's this really like fascinating sort of viewpoint of like he was just happy with his body and who he was in a
Yeah.
very like bizarre way that you don't think about. He was just like, no, I'm okay with me, and I'm okay
Mhm.
just being out there, and I'm okay with silence. I'm okay with aloneness, and it's the opposite of what community tells us we need to have, right? It's like, no, you have to have
Mm.
community. And it just really made me think of like this idea of you can't really be productive and helpful within any community. You can't help
Mm.
anyone if you haven't helped yourself. If you're
Yeah.
not happy with who you are and your body and who you are in the world, how can you be with other people,
Totally.
right?
Yeah.
And even though on a weird level, he was like, I just don't want to be around people.
Mm-hmm.
There's an interesting kind of lesson to be learned of like, oh, he was happy
Yeah.
with that, you know? And it's like, how can I, you know, like, how can I as a person not rely on community? You know what I mean? Like where I go like, oh, I got FOMO, like fear of missing out, where I'm like, because I'm not part of the community. I'm not, you know, like theater community. If I'm not out and about, if I'm not socializing, if I'm not in this or I'm not in that, then who am I as a person?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, you're still you. You're always
Mm.
you, right? Like you don't change. And it's like learning how to be happy with yourself and your own time and
Yeah.
your own body and that sort of self-acceptance. Because I, you know, the thing that I'm exploring right now is like being okay with saying no to things and being okay just being like, I'm cool, I'm okay just doing what I need to do with myself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I'm part of this community, but I don't need to be like, I'm in this community. Like I don't need to
Yes.
like in certain things. And, you know, when we talk about, you know, and now I think, you know, the thing you were sort of touching on, like, what does community mean? It's like, you know, we now have like community is like, you know, like the LGBTQ plus A community. You have like, you know, like there are communities within communities within communities within communities. It's like, um, and it's, and I think that's great because what it's doing is it's allowing people to like find themselves, right? We're like,
Mm.
oh, I see this, you know, and it's there. Um, and yeah, and it's like, but how do you still find yourself
Hmm.
within
You know,
those and
I,
be just happy with yourself, even if you're like, I'm not sure if I fully fit into this category, you
yeah,
know? Because I
I,
think
I,
that's the
I
thing is we create categories within categories within categories,
well,
which
so
is
this is
good.
what, yeah, I think this is where my brain leads is that it's like, I almost, I think internally, I think what I differentiate from what I'm hearing you talk about is a separation of like community versus a society, because I feel like
Hmm.
a community is like, for lack of a better word, is a safe circle, you know what I mean? Like,
Yes,
and
yes,
while like I'm somebody who will question like what my status is within my community and where I stand and am I loved, and I will have those questions. It's also like those aren't questions that anyone can answer but me, you know, because I think a community would recognize that those are internal problems I have and would accept me anyway. But I think what I'm hearing about those external pressures, that's like a societal pressure, which to me is like
yes,
it's either
yeah,
a larger circle or it's a more ambiguous, maybe it's more of a straw man situation, but it's like, you
right,
know, those pressures of like forcing yourself to fit in or being forced to fit in or any of those things or figuring yourself out, that's more to me like a cultural or a societal pressure than an actual community pressure,
yes,
you know. Because I totally understand what you're saying about them, and
hmm,
I think that at least where I lean towards though is that community would be a safer circle to be able to come in and out of, right? Where society isn't something safe to come in and out of. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
right,
And I think
exactly.
that's the goal is that that's what it should be, and then I get worried about that they bleed into each other, right?
Mm,
That like you're
mm,
like, oh, this is a community, and then they take like societal norms into the community thing, and you're
totally.
like,
Yeah,
oh, what is happening? And you're like, this is supposed to be a safe
yeah.
space, and now you're actually excluding someone and being harmful to someone, even though like that's, you know, what you said you're against. Like,
Hmm.
you know, you're trying
Well,
to be
that
like, we're accepting on this and we should do this.
yeah.
And then somebody walks in and you're like, oh, but you're not enough of that yet
Yeah,
within our
well,
community, right? And you're like,
that becomes a negotiable,
and
like
it's
that becomes an internal negotiation for yourself, though, right? Because
exactly,
it's
yeah.
like that's like there's nothing I can do or say that like would change that other person's behavior. Like it's like
Yeah,
I
yeah.
can't change how somebody thinks, and so it's like if I, you know, if there is somebody in my circle who, you know, I have felt safe with and I no longer feel safe with, like that's
Hmm.
now on me to negotiate. Like, do I continue that relationship or not? You know, um and like there's, you know, and that's like that's not easy, that's like there's a lot of sadness to that, right? But it's like,
Yeah.
you know, things shift, things change, right? Nothing's static, and so it's like
Fully
because
agree. Yes.
I hear what you're
Yeah.
saying too about like, you know, and I think all sides of the like supposed sort of like political spectrum do this of like there's like a purity test, you know, and I know that there's
Hmm.
definitely that on left leaning groups as well. Um, no matter how well intentioned, they still are leery, right? And that ends up getting manifested in inadvertently destructive behavior, whether it's like gatekeeping or purity testing or whatever it might be. But it's like I think for me where that comes down to is like, yeah, like I say, just like negotiating with yourself of like, okay, this was safe, but like eliminating the like sunk cost fallacy of like, well, but there has been time spent, and just
Yeah.
removing that altogether, and instead being
Yeah.
like, well, it's not safe now, so I'm gonna remove myself until or if something changes.
Yeah. And I no, I fully agree. I also think that like that can also be hard too, right?
Oh,
Like in
big time.
practice, like it's one thing, which is why like it's almost a weird thing. It's so much like you need community within community to like
Totally.
to know, right? You go like, oh,
Hmm.
this thing's feeling toxic, and I want to remove myself. But
Hmm.
sometimes we're like, no, but that's part of my identity, so I shouldn't have to leave. And
Yes.
so
Yeah.
what do I do? And
Hmm.
and then it becomes like a whole mess, and it's
Hmm. Well, and that's
yeah.
I think that's the thing that spikes me about like a story like say of like a hermit or something, is that it's like I think that's like I'm fascinated. I can't wait to read this, but it's also like I do believe that humans are a communal animal, and so I do
Mm,
think like I mean without knowing anything about this guy and
yeah,
not trying to impose any assumptions on him,
yeah,
but like that feels like there's a sadness there, and that feels like
yeah,
there's a disconnect there, and it's not something I'd be interested in doing
yeah,
myself. I'd love to learn about him and I'd love to hear about him, but like I
exactly.
do think like even a community of two is still a community,
Hmm. Yeah, yeah,
and he technically had a community. He had a living thing with him, so it's
yeah,
like
yeah. He's in
it,
nature, and that's just like
right?
he's connected to that, and that's what
Exactly.
you kind of find out sort of in the end is that he's like, no, no, I just don't want people. And once
Exactly.
he like,
Yeah.
he gets arrested and he goes to jail, and once he gets out, he has to live with his parents again, and they keep coming back to him, and you
Right.
just see this guy who's just miserable to be in
Yeah.
society, right? Just goes like, I
Yeah.
hate this. I just want to
Mhm.
be in nature. I just like
Yeah.
that's what makes me happy is just being alone and doing this. And they're like, but why? Like just the fact that nobody can understand it. And he's like, because I
Mm.
don't want to talk to you. Right? Like the
Yeah.
amount of disdain that he had for conversations. And you're just like,
Yep.
oh, you're just a rare bird. It's like you're the rarest of birds just out
Yep.
there. It's just like, no, I'm over here. And you're like, that's
Yeah.
fascinating. Folks who listen to the podcast are going to know on some level that you are a wrestling fan,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. I make
So
no
I'm going to
bones
throw,
about it. Yeah.
make no bones about it. So here's my question. In a world of professional wrestling, characters often embody larger than life personas. So, how do you think the themes of friendship, self acceptance, and community play out within the realm of wrestling storylines and the relationships between wrestlers?
Oh, well, I mean, to me that's embodied in the like almost 10-year long story of the elite and all the ins and outs that have been going on with that. I think Kenny Omega and Adam Page are like master storytellers of like intimacy and unpacking like toxic masculinity through
Mm-hmm.
their wrestling, and maybe even Adam Page more so. But I think I lean on Kenny Omega because of his long story with the Golden Lovers with Kota Ibushi, and how he's doing like a queer storyline about like a tumultuous love affair, and so um watching how the elite uh are close and intimate and tight and touch each other, and then they break up and they fight, and and like I
Mm-hmm.
think it really represents the chaos of what it means to be a friend. And I think actually a lot of stories of like tag teams who like achieve things together and then break up and then reunite. I think there's a really stock version of what it means to be a friend within that. I also was unpacking the other day about how there's a lot of born again Christians in wrestling, and I
Yeah,
get the feeling
shocking
that
amount.
a shocking amount, and I
Yeah,
get the feeling that it's because they get to touch boys all day. Like, but it's a straight way. Like, no, I'm not gay. No, I just grease up and wear a bikini and touch
yeah,
boys for a living, but it's not gay.
yeah,
Like, and so I can't help but feel like it's them circumnavigating, like it's like a little cheat route, it's like a shortcut through
Right.
Mario Kart of like how to touch boys and not get in trouble with God. you know
I was gonna say that, yeah, when it was like Christians, I was like, oh, it's probably because so many of them were like, we just had sex with everybody, cheated on all our wives, and did all the coke and drugs in the world. And then they get old and they're like, oh, I'm gonna have a heart attack and die if I don't stop. And then they meet
Yeah.
someone at their fifth wife who's like, Jesus is the way. And they go, sure, all
Mhm.
right, like
Yep.
Jesus and
Might as well
yoga,
try it.
and they
Yep.
might as well try it. And they're like, oh, I'm good. Yeah. And so it's like, so they just like
Yep.
buy in because it gets
Yep.
them away. Because like it's either that or admitting that you had a problem, and going
Hmm.
to like AA and all this other stuff. Like
Hmm.
just the amount of like
Well, and it's
debauchery
carte
that's
blanche,
happened.
right? Like it's
Yeah,
carte
and they just
blanche for
go,
them. When you
"You're
go born
forgiven."
again, you go
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So they're like,
You never have to
"Well,
actually fess
yeah,
up to anything. You get to just go, oh, I
exactly.
found Jesus, so now I'm a good person. So you
Yeah,
actually have to
yeah,
forgive me because I'm better
yeah,
than you now. Again, you know.
yeah, exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. But it is, yeah, no, I think actually there's lots of storylines that deal with, obviously in a very like melodramatic and heightened
Hmm.
and circus version of it. And also like there's yet to be a storyline that I see that resolves with not fighting, which like I would, as much as I love wrestling and I love the art of it, like I'm not somebody who
Right.
thinks you punch problems. So it
Yeah.
would be great if they somehow threw a wrench in there somewhere and found a way to tell a story where they actually talked about it and confronted each of their mistakes and took
Yeah.
accountability for their actions and
Yeah. That'd be insane. Could you imagine?
right
Just a
at Wembley
main,
Stadium they're just
yeah,
like
main
we've both
event.
made mistakes.
Yeah. It's the main event, and we're just gonna hug it out and not wrestle. Okay, we're friends now. End of show.
Yes.
Right?
Oh
And
my
we're
god,
like,
I would love
oh,
it. I would love it. i'm
okay,
i'm, I'm dying for that main event. um
that'd be hilarious.
um the real heart, as I often caveat here, the real heart of this show has been this question. It really focused on have I been a good friend? That
Mm,
was sort of the heart question. And as I was unpacking that, I got to realize what a term like community, a term like friend, these are really
mm.
nebulous, really multifaceted terms. And every time I pose this question, I get this really beautiful different answer because it's such a singular experience. And so I put to you what I've put to all the guests. To you, what does it mean to be a friend?
Yeah. Yeah, again, like it's such a big question, and yet it's probably also a very simple question.
Hmm.
I think like at its core, no matter what someone says, because I was thinking about this, is that it's almost like I think like you no matter what their answer is, it's always going to get boiled down. You can whittle it down to what
Hmm.
its
Hmm.
core, like what one thing means, and all of them shoot out from one answer. I think that
Totally.
at the end of the day, it's based on embracing others. Like I think it's just that's what it is at its core. Is that if you're just someone who's willing, like when you're a friend to someone, you've just embraced them.
Hmm.
Like you just go like, I embrace you. I get
Hmm.
wary of the word like acceptance because acceptance kind of feels like a like I had
Yeah, to
to
pass
like
a
it's like
test. Yes.
yeah like yeah it's like well I accept it and it's like no it's like you just openly embrace someone and that
I
idea of
love
like
that reframe. I love that so much.
yeah like I think that's just what it is at its core. So when you're like when somebody gives an answer and they're like oh it means this and this and this, you're like no, it all kind of trickles down to like embracing others
Hmm.
and getting embraced yourself. um yeah, which is a yeah it is a thing that I think people should be doing more of. I think that kind of like I think that connects a little bit to like the previous thing we are talking about, which is like the community like
Hmm.
accepting or like embracing rather than the
Hmm.
individual searching, right? Like one of my key
Yeah.
things is like you should never have to look for support. Support should just be there,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
it's easy to do so. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, like because it there's so many times when you're like oh I'm looking for this thing, and sometimes you'll be looking for that support and that friend and that friendship, and you'll miss that somebody was like holding their hand out the entire time. Like it's you'll
Yes.
be
Yeah.
shocked, like you'd be shocked on how many times or who it's going to be who will extend their
Yes.
hand and help you up when you're feeling down. You know, it may not
Mm-hmm.
be your best friend. It may not be like a family member, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
like it could be a stranger. You know, it could be yourself. Like you could have a moment with yourself and you're like, oh, I
Yeah.
just realized this thing. You know, it's like
Yeah.
these, it's, yeah. But again, that comes back to embracing. Like if you embrace
Yeah.
yourself, or like somebody else is like, no, I embrace who you are. And you're like, oh, okay, great. Like I can be me. And, you know, um,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's kind of at its core what
I love that. I
what
love that
means.
framing. I was thinking a lot about recently. I was thinking about the concept of grace, and like
Mm-hmm.
the concept of sort of like, allowing, which I know
Yeah.
has closer connotations to something like accepting, but it's just this. What in my heart, what it feels like I'm driving at is this. It's not allowing as if like I deign to allow you to exist, but it's more like,
Right.
oh, that's who you are. Absolutely continue that.
Yeah.
And I think that more comes back to this idea of grace, which is like, I think people who, to use like a very simple but like prescient problem right now, like people's resistance to like pronouns, is that it's like I find that very
Oh man, don't
ungraceful,
get me
right?
started. We'll
Because
be
it's
another
like,
2 hours on that one.
I know, and that's why I was like,
I'm
we got
just
to keep
like,
it
can
simple. But
we?
it's like,
Yeah,
it's like
it's
all
such an
all
easy
that
thing to
someone
do.
is asking you
Yeah.
for is like, this is a word that you already know, and I'd like to be addressed with
Yeah.
that word.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's all
Yeah.
it
That
is. And
it's
it's
so
it
easy.
finds like it's very to me it's a very deep lack of grace to resist that.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's very clumsy and it's very sloppy, and it demonstrates the person who's resistant, like has something really sad within them, or has something really broken within them,
Yeah.
and I do feel a lot of empathy for people who resist it because of the confusion and the fear that comes along with it.
Yeah.
But at the same time too, um you know it's not hard to just go, oh, okay,
Yeah.
like
It's the easiest thing in the world to
mhm,
just be like,
mhm,
okay, like you're you. Great.
exactly,
You
exactly.
know, I constantly say it all the time. I'm like, the only thing I care about is if you're an asshole or not. That's it.
Yes, that's
I
exactly
don't
right.
care.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Like, you know, you could be non-binary and an asshole. You know what I mean? Like,
yes,
you could be,
yeah,
you know, a cis straight person and an asshole. I only
mhm,
care if you're a nice person or not. That's it. Like, if
mhm,
you're a nice person to me, then and the people that I love and like I care for, great. And
mhm,
if you're not, then I'm just not going to give you the time of day. I don't care
yeah,
who you are in the world. I'm just
yep,
not going to put myself in situations or the people that I'm involved with to go like, hey, I'm gonna just let this crap happen. I'm just like,
yeah,
nope,
yeah,
I'm removing it. Like, bye bye.
yep,
Like, it's okay.
yep,
And it's
yeah,
like, and yeah, like the pronoun and just like the whole like, well, I don't. It's like you just do it. Like you don't care. You know what I mean? Like you
mhm,
called someone Prince until the
yeah,
day they died, and at one
yeah,
point they were just like, I'm now the artist formerly known as Prince, and you went cool beans. You know what I
yep,
mean? Like
yep,
Madonna's name isn't Madonna. Why do you give a
mhm,
shit? Puff
yeah,
Daddy changed his name a million times,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like
yeah,
his name's not Snoop Dogg, and yet here you are calling him
yeah.
Snoop Dogg,
Well,
right?
it's
Like
funny. I
why do you
actually
give a
always use
shit?
I actually always use wrestlers as a really good example of that. Like
Yeah, yeah,
straight
yeah, yeah.
people,
His name's not the
actually.
Undertaker.
Well, not only that, like I actually think that wrestling culture should be used as a bit of a case study for dead naming, because
Yeah, yeah,
he used to be
very
Dean
true.
Ambrose, and then he shows up at a new promotion, and now he's
Right.
John Moxley, and everybody adapts to it. And so
Yeah,
what I don't understand is like, well, why does he get that grace but someone else doesn't,
yeah,
and
yeah.
they don't understand that it is the same thing. Like it's just
Oh, it is
r-
exactly the
be
same thing.
truer to who you are in that moment, right? So,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
but
That's a great thing. I think I'm going to use that and be like,
right,
oh,
yeah,
that's cool. So do you just get? Are you like every time someone's like Hulk Hogan, you're like, Terry. His name's
exactly,
Terry.
exactly,
Like,
exactly.
no, he's Hulk
No,
Hogan. Like, what do you give a
yeah,
shit? You know what I mean? Like,
exactly,
that's just what
exactly.
it was. You
Yep.
don't even know that the guy's name's Terry, right? If I was
Oh
like,
God,
"Hey, Terry," you'd be like, "Excuse me, his name's Hulk Hogan," right?
his
Like,
name is Hulk. Actually,
it's
thank you,
Hulk.
but
Last name Hogan.
his name is Ultimate. His name
It's
is
Ultimate.
Ultimate. Thank you.
Yeah.
Last name Warrior. Although actually he's a funny one because he actually did change his name to Warrior. But
Well,
that's a
and then
tangent.
was actually like transphobic and
And then was a fucking piece
xenophobic
of shit.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm just
The
watching the
irony of
time,
that
so
guy.
I really want to I want to just jump to the very last thing.
Yeah.
I'm sorry we couldn't get to more of your questions. I really
Oh,
liked
yeah,
that question,
it's
but
fine.
we'll just we'll get you on
Yeah.
again, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I always love leaving listeners with like an actionable thing that they could try out this week. So what do you think is one thing people could try doing to be a better friend to them and their community?
I think it just goes back to embracing. I think that's the key to it. Like I honestly do. I really, really, really do. Like you know, I toured the last couple of years with a show called like a Batman parody 89 to 97. And it's just about, you think you're going to get a show about the Batman films, recreating them on stage, one person, blah, 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 blah. It's filled with stories about my parents and being myself and the whole like the play starts with a video, and the video has like slides of me as a kid, and I tell a story at the very beginning about how a teacher asked me to write an essay when I was like 7, and it's like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said, I don't know. And because I'm not grown up yet, which is true, that really happened. And I got in trouble, and and then I go like, oh, but I knew that they were just like telling me to like play in a sandbox. They were like, go do this, go do that, be this person, like you have to grow up. You can't be on swings anymore. You have to like start thinking about a job. And then I do the whole play about Batman and stuff. And then when I go to do the very end, I kind of tell that monologue. But then I continue it. So when you think it ended, I just continue that on. And the whole ending of it is, saying that, when I was a kid, I had to write an essay, and I said, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up, but I actually did. I wanted to be Batman. And I knew that I couldn't say I wanted to be Batman because I knew that I'd get in trouble. I knew that if I said that, adults would say, that's not a real job. That's just make believe. You can't actually be Batman. Pick something else to be with your life. Be somebody else. Go play in this sandbox over here. Don't play in this sandbox over there. Like, fit into this mold, this predetermined mold. Yeah. And here's why I know that's incorrect. And then I start removing items of clothing, and you start to realize that I'm wearing a Batman outfit underneath that looks exactly like the same Batman costume I wore when I was 4 years old, made out of felt.
Fuck yes.
And then I say that I believe that every single person on this planet knows who they are. Everybody. From the day you're born to the day you die, you know you the best. You know how you want to walk this planet. You know what roads you want to go down. You know how you want to cut your hair. You know how you want to talk. You know what clothes you want to wear. You know your identity the best. And the only thing that holds an individual back from truly being themselves is society telling the individual they cannot be themselves. And so you have to ask yourself this question: do I support others in who they are? And when you've come to terms with the fact that you are not doing as good of a job as you think, which is okay, and this is a thing that I myself, Rod, deal with every day and still work on every day, you have to ask yourself a far more important question, which is, how do I become better at supporting others in who they are? Because no one should ever have to look for support. It should just be there. And I know it works because I've had it my whole life. From a child to an adult, people have supported me in who I am. And then I talk a little bit more about like Batman and stuff. But that message, that idea, I believe still connects to, I just realized it's like so dark on my side.
Yeah, I was like, the sun just set.
The sun
I was like
just
watching the
went
sunset.
down.
Yeah, that was cool. I like that.
That at the end of the day, that still connects to friends, and you being a good friend and being a good person is, how do you support others? How do you support your friends and who they are and who they want to be? Yeah. Because, those things are immensely important. Immensely important. Yeah. That's my big thing right now. And I know that, in a way connects to like literally the conversation we just had about pronouns and people. And it's just like, hey, like if I can dress up as Batman and be a silly person, you can accept me, you can accept anyone on this planet.
Big time.
Like
Yeah.
everyone deserves friends. Everyone deserves like a community. Everybody deserves like all those sort of things, right? And they shouldn't have to look for them. We should just have it there, and we can just come in and go whenever we need, right? It's not hard. It's a very easy thing. It's easy practice, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, Rod, you're the best. Thank you. I feel like that's just such a beautiful summation of everything. I feel like I want to leave it there, but thanks for coming back on. I really appreciate
No,
this.
thanks
I
for having me
appreciate
on.
you
It was
reaching
nice
out
to.
and
Yeah, it was
yeah,
nice in
really.
between
Honestly,
shows.
I already know I have to get you on a third time because we barely
There.
talked about wrestling, and
Oh God, I know.
we didn't
Yeah.
even get to the Seattle trip, and so like we'll have to
Oh,
talk
that's
about that on the
right.
next
Yeah,
one,
yeah, yeah. Because
But
yeah. Oh, the
I don't
Seattle
want to. I
trip.
don't want to open.
Holy.
I was gonna say let's just plant the seeds for the third in the trilogy. It'll be the Rod Peter Jr. Forever episode. This is Rod Peter Jr. returns. Right?
Yeah. And then no one listens because they're like, oh, wrestling. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
The
I
three
don't know,
people we
man.
reach,
Wrestling's kind of gay, so I'm not going to listen to that podcast.
and that's how.
All
That's
right.
why
All
it
right.
rules.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Um.
Exactly.
So is there anything you want to plug? This episode won't be out by the time like your Fringe
Yeah,
ends,
I'll be
but like
I'll be
what do you
done.
got kind of coming up, or like anything in the future you want to plug? Anywhere you want listeners to find you? Anything like that?
No, I mean I'm on social media, on all the social medias. Blue Sky, I'm on Blue Sky too now.
What's Blue Sky?
Blue Sky is like this, like really hard to get into, basically like Twitter, but you have to get an invite code from someone to get in, and you have to be on long enough to then get a code that you can send to another person. And so,
Oh,
and they unlike Twitter actually pay attention to stuff and like remove
right.
bad. So you're like, oh, it's actually much nicer.
Interesting.
Yeah, like it's all my handle is all Rod Peter Jr. on everything. Like I'm very fortunate
Gotcha.
to have not one of those things where it's like X1 dash, the blah blah. It's like just Rod Peter Jr. wherever it is. That's always the same.
Love
And
it.
I don't do much except for like post things about movies and the entertainment that I watch.
I love it.
Because I hate social media. That's it. So yeah,
I mean, welcome to the club. That's what this whole show was about.
I know. Yeah, you're just like, oh, it's a cesspool.
Mm.
I'll just post the movies I like. That's it.
Yeah.
That's all I do now.
I love it. And that's it. Thank you one more time to Rod for coming on the show. It was such a pleasure chatting with him and just getting to catch up. And I hope I can get him on soon for some kind of, all wrestling all the time episode. I'm not totally sure if my listener base would be super interested in just like an entirely wrestling centered episode. If you think that's something you'd be into, let me know, because I genuinely feel like I could talk about pro wrestling for hours on end, but I do find myself avoiding it a little bit on the show. So yeah, just let me know. If you can't get your fill of Friendless, be sure to sign up for the weekly Substack. You're going to get a brand new piece of writing from me, along with a playlist for the week and all kinds of other goodies. It is free and it is a ton of fun. Sign up in the links in the show notes. You won't regret it, I promise. And if you regret it, well, hey, you could just unsubscribe. But you won't, because you're going to love it. So don't listen to me unpack a thought and not edit it out. Just subscribe and enjoy. But that is it for me. I'm going to wrap this up before I put my foot in my mouth and say something stupid. So thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you so much. And I hope you are I hope you're good. Hey, I hope you're good. I need to go to bed. I'll be back next week with a brand new episode, and I hope you will join me there. But I'm not going to worry about that right now, and neither should you, because that is then, and this is now. So for now, all I'll say is I love you, and I wish you well. Fun and safety, sweeties.